I've got some sage, sage leaves. Those usually stick around pretty well, and I'm just maybe ripping them up a little bit, toss them right in. And I posted pictures of all this to my Facebook page, by the way. So some fresh oregano, which you wouldn't think, but the oregano bush right now looks like a bunch of dead sticks, except if you look and dig down underneath, there's little tiny green bits underneath. So you just dig down and get the green bits. None of this you don't have to have the fresh herbs. You can absolutely use dried herbs, like from your herb cabinet or whatever. But if you've got any fresh herbs, or if you have a potted herb inside your house or something, that's good too. Some thyme. I had some fresh thyme still, doing okay. It's not dead yet. I have a bay plant, so I have fresh bay leaves. I usually, most of the time, just throw dried bay leaves in. 1 or 2. I've got a little tiny bit of fresh parsley, but I've also got the dried parsley. So I'm just going to sprinkle some of that in. Any kind of herbs that you can add to this, just add to its nutritional value. That is wild onions. You've probably seen them in your backyard or in the woods or something. It looks like weird stringy grass. It's if you bite one or smell it, it smells like chives. It's basically wild chives. But I'm just ripping those up, throwing that in. And the last thing I found that is growing all over the place, even this time of year, is cleavers. This is one you probably don't recognize, or you haven't heard of, also known as bed straw. Cleavers. This is a really great lymphatic cleanser, and I always grab a little bit of that. It works when it's fresh, but not really when it's dried. So I basically just go out in the yard. I don't plant it. I never plant cleavers. They just pop up all over the place. So I dig around and I see what I can find, whatever's green. I also have, for herbs, calendula flowers. If you hopefully know what calendula flowers are, So that's a dried calendula blossom. Calendula flowers are an excellent lymphatic cleanser. They also add a lot of vitamins and their lymphatic cleansing properties to your broth. And I have a little bit of dried stinging nettle. Stinging nettle is basically like the multivitamin of the herb world. I'm just going to put a little bit of that in. If you don't have calendula or stinging nettle or anything, you don't have to put it in. Whatever herbs you have in your cupboard, rosemary, sage, thyme, oregano, any of that stuff that you would normally cook with, just put some of it in there. It's great if you have it fresh, or if you can, step outside in your garden and actually find some that's still fresh. That's even better. But it's not the end of the world if you can't find it.
Amelia, I have a quick question while you're talking about herbs.
Yes.
Would you recommend against powdered spices in the bone broth, or would that work as well?
Powdered, like completely and utterly decimated, like I'm looking at, let's see, like garlic powder or something that's super fine. You can still use it. It's not going to be quite as good, but if that's all you've got, use it. I've got some of these, like, all right, when you've got a garlic bulb and you've gotten all the good cloves off, and then you get to the middle and there's all these little tiny crappy cloves, save that, because that can go right in the broth. You don't even have to peel it. I've just got this little teeny weeny bulb probably from my garden, and it's crappy, but whatever. I'm just going to take a knife, give it a whack, and stick that whole thing, all of those, into the broth. Let's see. I've got some peppercorns. I would say no more than a teaspoon, probably more like half a teaspoon worth. I just kind of put a little bit in the palm of my hand and stick that in. Also, I'll do the salt later. So mushrooms, Mushrooms are excellent. Like, holy cow, if you've got any kind of mushrooms, especially in my little freezer bag, like if I'm chopping button mushrooms or something like that, I'll stick the ends or whatever parts I'm not using in that bag. I forage whenever I can. So I have a little jar of some puffballs that I had found, just like a couple, 3, 4, stick that in, and some Berkeley's Polypore, which isn't super medicinal, isn't super nutritional. There's a little bit of nutritional value in it, but it's not going to hurt anybody, and I have it, so why not? I foraged it. And then, of course, reishi. This is also one that I foraged. If you buy reishi, this is what chunks of reishi look like. See the banding? The tops are a beautiful dark red. I only would put maybe 2 chunks worth in. I think I'm actually out of astragalus root, but astragalus root, Astraglus, is another really good one to put into a broth because that adds another more immune boosting powers. Reishi is extremely good for your immune system, especially when it's slow boiled in the water. So I put all of the mushrooms in and the peppercorns, and I'm going to save these for last. I have 3 different kinds of seaweed because I like seaweed, but seaweed adds iodine and magnesium and all kinds of other good stuff, and you really don't taste it. The only flavor it's going to actually impart to your broth is maybe a little bit of saltiness. So I got this one, dulse. I have Pacific kombu, and I have Pacific wakame. You can just grab one, you can get none, you can get whatever you want to grab, but I'm just going to put a little pinch. Because seaweed expands, seaweed gets like way, way bigger. The kombu is fun because it's like in these big sheets. So you kind of just snap, snap, throw that in there. I'm going to save my dulse because I like to snack on it. It's really good. And I have another, this is a mushroom that I got from the Asian market down in Killingly. If you've ever been there, you've probably seen this. It says black fungus. That's real specific. I had no idea, but I put it in most of my Asian soups. So I'm just going to take a couple of them. I know these tend to get really big when you cook them. They soak up a lot of the water. So before I do anything else, since I'm right next to my sink, you can see that's what it looks like so far. So I just fill the crock pot up. And this works in any size crock pot. It doesn't have to be a big one. I like to use a big one because then I can get a lot of stuff into it all at once. Basically filling it up just about as far as it'll go, because the more you can make at once, the better. It freezes really well. Let me get this up. That's what I usually do. When it's done, I freeze it in a bunch of different containers. All right, so that's filled up. And now a lot of the salt, this is just regular sea salt, is going to probably cook off. So it's up to you how much you put in. I would say a tablespoon, maybe 2 tablespoons if you want, but some of it's going to cook off. So honestly, I'm just going to kind of sprinkle some in there. And this is the other secret ingredient, apple cider vinegar. Apple cider vinegar is very important to put in your bone broth because without the apple cider vinegar, it's just broth. The apple cider vinegar leaches the minerals and the content out of the bones themselves. Let's see if I can, yeah. So for this, what did I say, like 7-quart crock pot? About a 1/4 cup. That's plenty. And if you have an infused vinegar, like you've got vinegar that's got rosemary infused in it or something like that, that's even better. That's great. But then I just take my trusty wooden spoon and give it a little stir. Make sure all the salt is covered up and all the herbs are floating around in there and whatnot. So I turn on the crock pot to, let's see, it's on manual. So I put it on low. Enter. Turn it on. Turn it on a little, get this on, and you don't have to use, you can use a timer if you want. Mine, I turn it on low and I set it and kind of forget it, because the longer it cooks, the better. I usually try to leave mine on at least 20 hours. 24 hours is better. If you can, my crock pot, I figured out this the last time I tried to make bone broth. I figured out that the crock pot actually turns itself off automatically after 24 hours. So I tried to reset it and let it go a little longer. 24 hours is usually pretty good, especially if you've got the ACV in there. But then you just let it go for that amount of time and you strain it. So I have a big bowl. I stick the colander in it and I pour everything from the crock pot through the colander into the big bowl, remove the colander. Usually the chickens get it, whatever's it left in the colander. With this kind of bone, the marrow bones, oftentimes I'll pick through and take a lot of the marrow out and eat it for myself because I think it's bloody delicious. It's really good. It's good for brain health. It's good for bone health. It's excellent. But if you think it's too fatty or you can't handle it, I mean, you can give it to the animals or something. I'm sure your dog or cat would love it. But then, yeah, strain it out, let it cool down, and put it into containers. It freezes really well in either plastic or glass. I like to save some in the fridge too, because then I can have a couple of mugs of it. If you make it for the first time, or if this is only one of the few times you've ever made it, definitely taste it the first time. You can do it before you strain it or after. It's easier to taste it after you've strained it out. But like, just take a ladle, stick some in a mug, taste it. Pretty often, more often than not, you'll need to add a little salt because, like I said, the salt kind of cooks off. So salt it to taste if you're just going to drink the bone broth. But a mug of bone broth makes you feel so much better if you've been ill, if you haven't been feeling great, if your stomach's been upset. This is the cure. And you don't just have to drink it out of a mug. I use it as a soup base. So, we'll make, we call it pretend ramen. It's not actual ramen. We just get some noodles from the Asian market and put that in the broth with some kimchi and a couple other things that we throw in. And it's absolutely delicious because the bone broth is just so nutritious and so hearty that it's basically a meal in itself. But you can cook pasta with it. You can cook your rice in the bone broth, and it soaks that up just like it would soak up the water. So that just it adds nutritional value to your diet. Do I have enough water? I'm actually going to add a little bit more water to this just because I can. But yeah, strain it and like I said, drink it or freeze it or whatever you want to do. But if you're not the kind of person that cooks a lot and you don't want to be saving your scraps for weeks and weeks, you can just you can get a couple of sticks of celery, wash them off, crack them in half, stick them in. You can get an onion, maybe 2 onions. It doesn't really matter what kind. I don't even peel them. Just like cut it in half, stick it in. A couple of cloves of garlic, cut them in half, stick them in. Some, the mushrooms or pepper or whatever else you've got little scraps of, you can just throw it all in there. And every little bit adds to the nutritional value of the bone broth. It adds extra vitamins. The herbs are great if you have them. If you don't have them, like I said, work with what you've got. If you can buy bones or buy your meat from a local farm, that's great. Do it, especially, in the summertime when it's easy because the farmer's market is out. But if you can't right now, work with what you've got. Go to the store and get what you can. I always save, if we process one of our own chickens, I always save the carcass because, we raised that bird from this big up until it's dead. So I know that's good meat. Like I said, I would say it's probably a little better to use the organically raised ones, or if there's a farm around here, you could say, oh, hey, I've actually seen how your chicken is raised. We know it's good, just because some of the factory farmed ones they're not gonna be as quite as nutritious. They've been raised super quick, and there's still some nutrition there. It's just I don't think it's quite up to par with buying a locally sourced piece of meat or bone or whatever. But yeah, that's about it. And they sell this stuff. I don't know if you've ever been to the health food store or like the health food section at Big Y or whatever. You can get a jar of it. Let me see. Have I got a little jar hanging around? Not even. Probably about the size of this small jar of bone broth. And it's like $12 to $15. Whereas if you do it this way, you have 7 quarts of bone broth for basically whatever you paid for the bones and all the other little scrappy bits, the bits of mushroom, the seaweed, and all that stuff keeps really well for a really long time. You know, I'm talking like at least a year, if not a little more. So you can make all the bone broth you need with those little bit of ingredients and whatever scraps you've got. So yeah, that's it. I mean, it's a 25 minutes later, we're done.
Does anyone have any questions? You can either submit it in the chat, or you feel free to unmute yourself and ask Amelia any questions you may have about her recipe. Well, I'll start, Amelia, because I do have a question. My question is there any vegetable that would be a bad idea to put into bone broth? Like I'm thinking cauliflower or broccoli or something that's like a non-starchy vegetable. Could that go wrong?
It would, I did learn that recently. I've done it before. Like I've put a couple of little chunks of like the end scraps of kale or something in there, and I didn't really notice much of the difference, but I have since learned that you're not really supposed to put a lot of the brassicas in there. Brassicas being kale, cauliflower, broccoli, collard greens, that kind of stuff, because it can make your broth a little bit on the bitter side, especially if you put too much. If you put like a little chunk of stem in there with all the other stuff, it's not going to be a big deal. But I think in this one I've got scraps from little bits of cabbage. Cabbage actually works okay. If it's a vegetable that you could think of yourself eating in a soup for the most part, it'll work okay in the broth.
Good to know. Does anyone else have a question?
Yes. Would you use turmeric?
Yeah, you can put turmeric in there. I wouldn't put a lot because it can overpower the flavor of the broth, but you can totally put some in there, especially if it's like the powdered stuff. Put a couple of shakes in there. On its own, naturally, because of all the stuff that's regularly in the bone broth, it's actually bone broth itself is anti-inflammatory. So if you're trying to add more anti-inflammatory, yeah, that's good. Unfortunately, with turmeric though, you have to use a lot of turmeric to get the anti-inflammatory effects. Like you have to be taking a lot of curcumin to be feeling the anti-inflammatory effects of it. So just experiment with it. You know, you could put the powdered stuff in or grab a little chunk of root and maybe put some of that in, but it's going to make the flavor change a little bit.
I have another question, Amelia.
Okay.
You're saying you can freeze it and you can also put it in the fridge. How long would it last in the fridge?
Oh, a good week. I mean, I wouldn't leave it more than a week, but wait for my mother worked at the health department for years and she'll probably scream at me for saying that, but I wouldn't leave it in there more than a week. Usually if you stick it, I plan on freezing it. So like when I strain it, I put it in my freezer containers, and basically anything left that won't fit in a freezer container or that I haven't already drank a mug of goes in the fridge so that I can drink some later, or I'll be like, well, I've got like half of a container full. I might as well make some soup this week. You can actually thin it out if you want to make soup and make it last longer, because the bone broth can act kind of like a base. So what a lot of times if we don't have a lot left over for some reason, we'll put like 2 cups of bone broth in a pot and then fill the rest of the pot with water. And you're just going to have to add a little bit of extra salt and pepper in there to make it taste better. You know, add your vegetables or whatever kind of soup you're making.
Are there any more questions from any participants?
Hi, Amelia.
Hi, Patty.
How are you? Great job, by the way. I had no clue about the seaweed, but I will definitely add that into mine. What about cumin? Is that good to put in, or would that be too spicy?
I would say cumin is right up there with turmeric. It's going to change the flavor a little bit. It's going to, like if you put a lot of turmeric in, it's going to end up having kind of an Indian flavor. If you put a lot of cumin in, it's going to kind of have a little bit of a Mexican flavor. It's entirely up to you. Any of those, basically any herb that you've got, you can put in there. I just wouldn't put a crap load of it in there.
Oh, okay. Then now when you said the Asian noodles, you go down to the market. Would
Yeah.
that be like the shirataki noodles? Would that work? The water noodles?
I'm trying to think. Hang on. I have some sitting on my countertop right now. I have to have the gluten-free one, so I get the rice one. This is what I got. This big ass package. This lasts me like a month or two, for as often as we have the soup. There's also sweet potato noodles, and there's Thai noodles. Oh, what's this one? Where's the one? Hang on. I just got this at Big Y yesterday, and with this broth that I just made for us, showing you guys, I got this. My husband loves pho. You pronounce it pho, not pho. So I can't wait to try that. That looks really good. It's got a flavor packet in there. Maybe we'll use it. Maybe we won't. I don't know. We tried that the first time we tried making the noodle soup. He bought this whole box of this flavoring, and it's like anise and cardamom and allspice and all kinds of stuff. And I said, why did we bother buying this when I have all this crap in my cabinet and I could just make it myself? So I've just been making it myself. And it's nice to throw a little bit of allspice in there too. But when spice, the heavier spices or the sweeter spices, like what you're talking about there, are you want to taste that flavor. And when when you're cooking the bone broth, as long as you do, it can kind of dissipate. So what I would do with something like cumin or maybe turmeric or anything like that is add it in later, like when you're making your soup, when you're drinking your broth or whatever. Add that in later so you can have that flavor. Because like I said, when you cook it all together like this, it meshes with all the other flavors, and it's like, we are bone broth. We are one flavor.
Gotcha. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, Amelia, maybe you could tell us where to find you and your recipes. And yeah.
Sometimes I have recipes, not always. I do. I have a website. It's www.blacksunfarmct.com. CT like Connecticut. So I have a blog there, and I've written about bone broth in the past. I write about herbs and things like that on my blog. It's also got links to our Facebook page and Instagram, and it's my husband helps, but it's 99% me. So if you follow me, follow Black Sun Farm on Instagram or on Facebook, I'm always posting pictures of things that we've cooked, things that we've grown, things that we're eating that night with some recipes. You feel free to comment or message me and say, hey, how would you cook this, or what's your recipe for that? I'll answer you. I mean, I'm happy to answer questions. We sell soy-free and free-range eggs and vegetables, and I'm an herbalist, so I sell herbal teas and tinctures. I also hand make incense, and I do herbalist consultations. So if you've got physical issues that you're trying to work through without having to see a doctor, I can oftentimes help people work things out like that. I know when something is severe enough to say no, you need to go to a doctor. I'm not replacing a doctor or anything. But if you've had stomach issues for the longest time, or you've had skin problems for going on for months and months and months, I can probably help you out figuring out a way to change your diet and add certain herbs to your diet that would help clear that up. So like I said, that's a consultation. And I'm going to be at the farmers market, the Killingly Farmers Market at the Killingly Library this whole season. Last year we were only there one weekend a month, and we're going to sign up for the whole season this time. So we'll be there, or you can find us online, and I'm on Upper Maple Street in Killingley. If you've driven by, you've probably seen my farm sign. So that's that. Hopefully you wrote it down. I know this class wasn't that long. I talked really fast. Sorry. Did anybody miss anything?
I actually recorded the course too, so we'll probably make it available on the Killingley Ag website, which is killinglyag.org.
Cool.
But I think that wraps it up. So thank you, Amelia, and thank you everyone who attended. If you would like a recording or have any additional questions for me or Amelia, you all can email me and I'll put you in contact with Amelia. So
All right.
have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you,
And
Amelia.
you're welcome. You're welcome. Feel free to ask me if you have any questions, and have a nice rest of your Sunday.
Thank you. It was wonderful.
Good. Thanks.